My own interest in photography began with an interest in photographs, old photographs, as artifacts of another time. So very much a material response, a material stimulus to my interest that ultimately led me to have a career very much focused on the materiality of photographs. Daguerre and Daguerre and Niepce had the first problem of what do you call the imaging system they were evolving. Here is notations of the various different Greek words that were being considered to form a neologism as a name, interestingly enough, for not so much the process as the product of the process. Considering terms that use the idea of picture or painting or drawing or image, an image of nature or image made by nature or true to nature were all considered in various different combinations. Ultimately, they considered physot, phusot, autophus, and autophys as potential names, interestingly, for the product of the technology, not necessarily for the technology itself. So where we have photography, which is the name of the technology, and photograph derived from the name of the technology, their first consideration was, what do you call the thing that is made by the technology? It's interesting to see in the notes of Niepce that he refers to the light-sensitive surface as a rétine, like a retina, and Daguerre refers to the product of his experiments as drawings. This concept of painting, drawing, of course, goes back to the meaning of image itself, which is, if you look for the etymology of the word, goes back to ancient Greek and refers to drawing or painting of a specific individual, if you will, and that individual being not a god, but a particular god. Anyway, the product of Niepce's process, he referred to ultimately as a heliograph. The process that Daguerre and Niepce collaborated on, their first system, they entitled a phototype and phototypy as the act of making this thing. Not a very euphonic and easily pronounced and appealing name. Ultimately, Daguerre, I believe, not out of an act of egotism, entitled his process, the process including of the camera and apparatus, basically the mechanical objects for the system, and the daguerreotype. He referred to the product as drawings, and ultimately it came to be used as the name for the product. In other words, what would be called photography. Interestingly enough, photography, although it's used as early as 1839, various different claimants to its first coining, Herschel being given the prominent crown, if you will. The term was basically used for the first 10 years of photography and photograph, the product, only to refer to photography on paper. The paper system was introduced by Fox Talbot, his first system being called photogenic drawings, light generated drawings, and ultimately the use of the term calotype for his patented system that competed with the daguerreotype. Photography, we are often told in various different histories and in dictionaries that it is a neologism formed out of the Greek word for light, which is photos, and graphia, or graphian, which commonly is said to mean writing with light. I've always felt that that was very much a wrong interpretation of photographs, that it is not writing, it doesn't resemble writing at all, but you can see where it comes from, the many different meanings, and particularly the evolution of the word graphe over time. It was used to mean a description of something, to write, to express by written characters, to draw, to represent by lines drawn, but the oldest and most significant meaning, to scratch, to carve, to mark. Therefore, I think it would be much better had the definition been given out as light marking as opposed to light writing. You're not going to find that commonly given out in many of the educational works that talk about the origin of photography. In 1839, you can find the definition of photography. It's very, very clear and was very useful for a good 170 years as the art being used in the sense of a technology system, the system of producing images by the application of chemical changes produced by certain substances by the action of light or other radiant energy. Very clearly in the definition, it's not just silver bromide or silver iodide, but it could be any number of other chemicals used, and not just visible light, but the full spectrum of light, visible and invisible, including other radiant sources of energy, such as heat. Very much a useful definition that served very well for a good 170 years. Technology of photography has been in constant evolution from its beginning, not necessarily improving, but certainly changing for applications for different purposes and commercial exploitation. From 1839 to 2000, however, the dominant system, the commercially dominant system of photography was silver halide-based chemical technology, chemical imaging. As of 2000, the technology has shifted to be primarily electronic-based physical technology. A very, very big difference and change. It really has resulted in a very different understanding of what a photograph is, or misunderstanding of what a photograph is. It's important to have a very clear definition of photography to differentiate that form of technology from a significantly different form of technology. Photography, which used to be a standalone technology, is now a subset of imaging technology, and it itself a subset of information technology. In 1982, I went up to the library of the Eastman House to look at the Journal of the Society of Photographic Scientists and Engineers. It was named Photographic Technology. When I went up in 82, it was Imaging Technology. The title had changed, and I had not yet ever saw the use of that term to describe the technology of photography. Some years later, the society changed its name from the Society of Photographic Scientists and Engineers to the Society of Imaging Sciences and Engineers. From that time on, I was quite aware that there were going to be very significant changes coming forward, in which photography itself was dissolving into some other form of technology. In searching for an illustration of what I believe the condition we are in now, which I believe is a confusion of tongues, a use of terms we don't know the meaning of, or we don't share a common meaning of, in particular understanding of what we call photography and what we call imaging, what we call photograph and what we call image is at issue. The problem with the Tower of Babel was that man was reaching to be godlike, and God destroyed the Tower of Babel because of that. Technology fundamentally is reaching to be godlike. We are born with very limited capacities that only go so far. Technology is means by which we extend our capacities, our capacity to work, our capacity to see, our capacity to know, through some form of artificial means, not a natural mean. The representation that I found of the Tower of Babel in my search came from an individual's website in which he was complaining that somebody had asked him whether his avatar had a soul, which he thought was a ridiculous question at first, but then he considered the possibility that his avatar could have a soul. In the same way, does a photograph or does an image have to be a photograph? It certainly does not. There are many things that look like photographs. What you're seeing right now, somebody might actually think is a photograph, but it doesn't fit the definition of photograph. It is a projection of sort. It is a screen rendition of something that was never really photographic. What's interesting about his Tower of Babel, his listing of the different platforms, texting, Facebook, Twitter, phone call, WhatsApp, Skype, Zoom, virtual reality, makes no reference to image. The names of the commercial brands of certain forms of imaging technology do not reflect by any means something like what photograph meant, which is something made by the action of light. There would be a real different word for what is today, and indeed that word is imaging, that at one time would have been photograph. If you ask anyone, whether it's a highly specialized person or just a regular person next to you, what the definition of technology, photography, and photograph is, you will find that it's not easily answered. For technology, they might say, well, the airplane, the automobile, the telephone, but that's naming technologies. It doesn't tell you what the meaning of technology is, which interestingly enough, the etymology of the word goes all the way back to Sanskrit. Tech meant weaving. Weaving was a way to extend our natural state of nakedness into protected by cloth. A very, very interesting ancient technology that normally we would not name as a technology today. It's a way of doing something, in essence, whether it depends upon science or not, or highly evolved mechanisms, is not part of the original meaning and definition. The word photography, they will have trouble with as well. Usually the answer is something made with a camera. It's certainly not part of the original definition, nor is it necessary to form what photograph is by the action of chemistry. No camera was necessary for a photogenic drawing. Photograph itself, they will say it's a picture or it's an image. They won't talk to the fact that it depends upon the action of light. It's remarkable how far we have drifted, and certainly no one's going to say radiant energy is the essence of the technology of producing photographs. Without these definitions, without a clear definition, there's some work that can't be done. In conservation, which very much, as it developed in the 1960s and early 70s, addressed not so much the image as the object that is a photograph, understanding what type of photograph, what its physical and chemical structure was, whether its original print aesthetics were intact or had changed over time. It very much was a material understanding of the photograph and incorporated, as I said, the history of the technology as well as an analysis of the object that was under consideration. And it was in my particular specialty, not the preservation of the image, but the preservation of the artifact, and that artifact being a particularly valuable one for its rarity or its artistic and cultural expression. The definition of a photograph that I use is a record of radiant energy made on a certain surface at a certain time by a means of chemical or physical response. That record is not necessarily an image by our normal understanding, not a painting, not a drawing, or an image. You can have photographs by that definition, things that are generated by radiant energy, not necessarily visible light, made on any number of surfaces, including, I'd say, you can say, registered on a record. The record is an important aspect of it. Registered on a electric sensitive system where, digital imaging results. Anyway, in terms of a technology, photography, many years I have thought is fundamentally many technology, a copying technology, a duplication technology, a communication technology, but fundamentally it's a recording technology. It's part of the artificial extension of memory. This is also where time, which is very much a factor of what photography, what distinguishes photography, is an aspect of memory. We have now new terms like time-based media. Well, photography to me always was a time-based medium. It's fundamentally an artificial means of aiding and extending the memory, particularly visual memory, and thus expanding the mind. That's the technology. It's a memory technology. That's not a common understanding or a common answer that you're going to get from anyone. The original miraculous nature of photograph was not making an image of nature, but transforming what was intangible, that is the visual experience, into a tangible thing, something you could hold, something you could refer to frequently over time, something you could share with someone else. What you saw shared with someone else, recorded tangibly out of materials. The miraculous nature of the present transition of photography was the making of the material photograph into an immaterial, an electronic record, which there's no thing in itself. It's held in something, it's on something, but it isn't a thing in itself, not a material thing in itself. That's an incredible reversal of what really was the most astounding and unbelievable and momentous change in life rendered by this light-sensitive technology. Today, we have the problem of thinking about photographs and other things that are like photographs as images. It's a generic term, hence imaging technology. There's little consideration of the object, but there really needs to be a category of understanding of certain photographs as images and objects, inseparable. It is essential. In conservation, we use to teach the concept of a true photograph. True perhaps is not the best word, we couldn't find another one, but to distinguish what is a true photograph is an image object that was sensitive to radiant energy at some stage of its making. That's directly in that thing that you were looking at that had an image on it that was an object as well as an image, had to have been light sensitive at some point of its making. In teaching about how to appreciate photography and photographs, the approach was a material approach. This is a lecture we were giving from the early 1980s about the history, technology, and identification of photographs, different processes different chemistry, different systems, but all silver halide based from 1840 to 2000, whether it was color imagery or monochromic imagery, it was rendered by silver halide light sensitive technology. A generic model must be understood, very much a material model, without identifying the material first, but understanding the final imaging material, the thing that's forming the image that you see. It could be silver, it could be pigment, it could be dye. The binder, what it's held in, could be gelatin, could be egg white, could be some form of plastic. The support could be paper, could be glass, could be metal, could be cloth, could be wood, could be any number of different surfaces that you could get it to stick to. This is a common problem, is that people don't understand a photograph in terms of its physical, much less its chemical makeup. Ultimately, what does this matter? Most people can live without it, but the preservation of the legacy of chemical imaging, the 150 and more years of what was produced as a material object that we call photographs, without a clear and commonly held definition of photograph that incorporates understanding of the materiality of the formation and composition of the legacy of silver halide-based photography. Understanding of the record and the record itself is actively now being lost and ultimately will be lost.